Welcome to this evening's session. My name's Dave Harrison. We'll go through a couple of opening slides and then I'm going to hand over to Jess, who's going to present the main part of this session. Your mics will be on mute, but please feel free to interact, as in leave your cameras on so you can engage, and also use the chat function for any questions. And that way we can monitor to see what happens and goes on as well. The session is being recorded. Behind the scenes, I have my colleague Anne, who is helping me work with the chat box and everything else. But today's session will be about deaf awareness. For myself, I'm actually looking forward to this because I've never worked or been around anyone really that I've had to deal with. So I'm actually first step into education is this evening for me. Like I said, myself and Anne will be facilitating and holding it. Please be aware that this is recorded, so you can watch it on catch up, and all these sessions will be going on to things like the spotlight or being shared later on. You can, if you want to, use transcript or live captions, so you just need to go onto your three dots and go down the menu and you will see those options there, and I'll try and turn transcript on as well in a second. Please feel free at the end of the session to ask questions to Jess, and then we can ask them on your behalf or we can bring you in and invite you. But it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Jess, who is going to take this session forward. Jess, over to you.
Hello everybody, welcome. I hope you're very well and enjoying the last session of the day. So I'm going to start sharing the screen now, if you bear with me please. So before I start, the voice that you hear is not actually mine, it's my interpreter's, and it might be a bit of a delay because I actually need time to process the information. So me signing to voice, so sometimes there might be a bit of a delay and a bit of gap, so just please bear with us. So this session explains deaf awareness, and then there's also some bits and pieces that you can take home for yourself to practice with your family, with your college, and that's to do with sign language itself and having a few tips of what it is and how to do it. If you would like to ask me any questions, please either write them down and ask at the end, or if you want to pop those into the chat function as you think of them, and they will be asked to me at the end of the session, because unfortunately, due to the setup, I cannot see the chat function today. So my background, I was born deaf. So I am 42 years old. At that time, they only diagnosed me at the age of 3, which is quite late because there's no newborn screening. So I was brought up to speak, which is known as oral. And it wasn't until I went to university that I met deaf people. And I could see that deaf people had a beautiful language that was very rich, that meant they could communicate in a different way. And I found that communication was so vital. So that's what got me interested. It was at university I decided I'd like to become an advocate. That means I can help people translate certain things, help them with their English, and I went to qualify as an advocate in the Care Act. And then I realised through my work that there weren't many deaf interpreters, so I went to London and achieved my level 6. I'm currently training to be a deaf interpreter, so I have what's known as a purple badge, which means I'm a trainee, which I am incredibly proud of. So the aims of the presentation today. Hopefully, you'll understand how deaf people have certain barriers in life, and you'll see firsthand certain problems that they may encounter every day. You'll also learn how to communicate with deaf people, and that's in terms of socializing and other aspects to deaf people's lives. If you're interested in learning any sign language, there's certain courses out there. So by all means, if this is something that kind of floats your boat and whets your appetite, then please do ask me. I can give you details afterward. So even if you have basic communication, a deaf person will always appreciate you making the effort to try and communicate with them rather than completely disregarding them. So I'll explain the grammar of sign language because the syntax is slightly different to English. And you will be given tips how to communicate with a deaf person. And I'll also be covering how deaf people are no different to hearing people, and they are able to achieve equally to their hearing counterparts. Just to let you know, I'm asking the interpreter not to voice this over, so she will be quiet for now. So how did you feel? You saw me signing. What did you do? How did you feel inside? Maybe you felt frustrated, worried, confused. So now imagine you're the deaf person and people are talking to you. You get a sense of how a deaf person feels. Maybe take a little note now, or a little moment now to write a note, because that's how deaf people feel every day. There are so many communication barriers deaf people face. Communicating with a deaf person. Not all deaf people use interpreters, but should you encounter a deaf person with an interpreter, the deaf person will sit opposite to you, and then the interpreter will sit by your side. And that way you enact direct conversation and communication. Because if an interpreter is opposite the person speaking and sat by the deaf person's side, then it means the deaf person will be straining their neck, which is not appropriate. So for example, if I just explain my setup at the moment, we're online, I'm facing my laptop and my interpreter is sat completely opposite me. So she can see me when I'm signing and she can voice me over effortlessly. If she was sat by my side, you'd notice my head moving to the side, which doesn't add any richness to the connection that you feel when trying to converse with a deaf person or a hearing person if you're deaf. Not all deaf person use sign language, some lip read. So what's incredibly interesting is to know that lip reading is not 100% accurate. You can actually only get 30% or a third of the English language read on the lips because of PBD look all the same. So what's incredibly important is to have the context of what's happening. So then you kind of, it's very difficult in that there's a lot of guesswork used. So let's say, for example, you're at the doctor's, you know there's an operation. If a deaf person's lip reading, they kind of fill in the gaps really. So then they can potentially be led to miscommunication. So for example, if the topic changes, they may not be able to follow. So for example, if it completely changes, the deaf person lip reading would not be able to keep up with the conversation. It's no different in a meeting. It's very difficult to follow any communication with more than one person at a time. So the interpreter's job is to facilitate communication between deaf and hearing people. We don't use the word help. They facilitate communication, so they make it happen. There's a new category recently in 2020. There's been many informal deaf interpreters supporting interpreters with deaf people who do not have traditional sign language. So the NRCPD, the regulating body for interpreters, so there's a specific regulatory body, the NRCPD, who are there to regulate interpreters. Their job is to make sure people are held accountable for their actions. So, for example, just because somebody's French doesn't mean they're going to be able to teach French to other people. So there's a strict category put in place, strict qualifications, and you adhere to code of conduct and ethics. To become a deaf relay interpreter, you have to have a good grasp of the English language and for written language as well. There's lots of deaf people who are not able to read English, therefore they will need an interpreter to translate the information on the piece of paper. So I've explained specific needs of deaf people and the complications. So you'd have a deaf relay interpreter for maybe somebody who has learning difficulties, somebody who's not native to England, or the term that we often have within the deaf community is the grassroots deafness. So people that may not have been able to access English in their lifetime, may not have been immersed in the richness of English, and therefore would need certain complexities of the English language translated into their culture so that they can understand. So the deaf client will make sure the deaf person understands what's going on within the interaction. The only negative with this is the fact that you have to pay not only for the deaf relay interpreter, but also the interpreter, because being deaf, the deaf person, when they sign, will need an interpreter to translate. So unfortunately, then you're going to have two bills in that respect. So simple words, deaf people may not understand. Something that's so well used to hearing people may be not understood. They don't. So for example, if you said the word direct debit, they may not understand that. It's not the fault of the interpreter or anything. So they would be signing so that the deaf person will understand. But it's literally that sometimes these whole concepts need breaking down to the point where the culture of certain elements will always be needed to be explained just that little bit more. So deaf relay interpreters provide specialist language. So for example, deaf people are born abroad. So thinking about the amount of sign languages around the world, there are over 50. So for example, my brother said to me, gosh, I thought sign language is the same all around the world, but it really isn't. That's a common misconception. Maybe you realise, maybe you don't. I've said that point before, so we should continue. So a deaf relay interpreter will adapt to the deaf person's needs. So that's my new role currently. It's interesting for you to know, just in case you have any experience of this in the future. So one of the questions I have for you today, do you think deaf people have an invisible disability? Feel free to pop your answers in the chat or hold them to the end. So the answer is yes. Because you can't really tell that somebody's deaf. I'd say people within the deaf community might be able to pick up on the little subtle body language shifts. So, but hearing people, if you are a lay person not understanding anything to do with deafness, you wouldn't understand. So So in terms of accessing a disabled toilet, they could access, but often you'd find that a disability toilet would be locked anyway, so they're quite difficult to access sometimes. True or false? Deaf people hear music. So deaf people can hear music, but it's in a different way. They won't hear particular words, but they'll be able to feel the music. They'll feel the vibrations and the beat and notice whether the tempo is fast or slow. Like for me, from my example, I can hear it in my chest. So you'll place your hands on a speaker or wherever. If you're in a particular environment, you'll pick up on the sounds. And depending if you have a hearing aid or a cochlear, depends whether you can pick up the melodies. So the next question I have, do deaf people have deaf children? It's possible that genetics would pass on the deaf gene. However, I would say most deafness is coming about through genetics. And that's when you will have deaf children to deaf adults. Do deaf people drive? I drive. However, in America, there's different rules. So deaf people have a second mirror. So the mirror you have in the car itself, you'd have a second mirror to see behind you, so you can see the passengers behind you. Personally, I think deaf people make better drivers because we've got better visuals and better peripheries than hearing people. I know people can be scared, especially hearing people in a car with deaf people signing and driving at the same time. That's just my experience and my opinion. So the old English word for dumb. So you will experience people say deaf and dumb as in meaning not able to speak. So there is also, so the term deaf dumb became quite well known. Then it was changed to deaf mute. Because actually hearing people didn't realise deaf people could speak. So I was taught to speak through a balloon back in my day. The balloon was blown up and you'd speak into the balloon and you could feel the vibrations, and depending on what I would say, the vibrations would change. Sometimes I'd use touch, so I would touch the person who was speaking, their throat, and that's how I was taught to speak, and that's why I can speak. Gosh, that's back in the 80s now, and things have changed. You've got so many things that have changed. You've got the new technologies whereby cochlear implants are now used. So technology has advanced deafness greatly. So thinking about communication when you guys go abroad, as hearing people, you go to a foreign country that speak a different language. I'd make the assumption that you all try and use gesture or try and point to convey and trying to make yourself known. That's no different to deaf people, and I am no different if I were to go abroad. I would do exactly the same. So thinking about the percentage of deaf children born to hearing parents, you might be surprised to find that it's over 90%, which is actually quite a high percentage. That's why resources are so important, because deaf people, when hearing people have deaf child, there's so little information out there to enable deaf or hearing people to make informed choices about their deaf child. There's a well-known charity called the National Deaf Children's Society, NDCS. They support hearing people who have deaf children to access certain information. I know there's certain things at the hospital, information given, but that's very much the medical model of deafness. However, there's a much more rich cultural element to the community of deaf people, and therefore the NDCS will enable hearing people to make a better, more informed decision of how to treat their child. These are old statistics, they're not recent. I believe there was the new, I think it was, there was a census last year, and they actually for the first time put BSL on there, so hopefully enough deaf people filled in their forms and sent that off, so we'd get a better, more up-to-date version of the statistics currently. So deaf people like me, it's 9 to 12 million. Hard of hearing, 8.3 million, which is quite a lot of people. However, those people may not identify as deaf people. So 50 to 120,000 use British Sign Language. If you look at the bottom, it says only 1,000 fully qualified registered interpreters for all those 50,000 to 120,000 of sign language users. So it's very aware that that there's not enough interpreters out there to support deaf people. So deaf people that have lost their hearing just through age, it's 6.5 million. So deaf people, or people that are born, are deaf as a result of illness, so meningitis, they would be classed as deafened, and that's 123,000. So that basically means they were born hearing, however, have lost their hearing over time. Deaf blind or Usher syndrome, 24,000. And as I said, these are rough numbers now. So just taking those statistics, really, we've identified that deaf people lack communication support greatly. So BSL is used more than Welsh or Gaelic. There are 3 million deaf BSL users. So, sorry, there are 3 deaf adult BSL users in every 1,000 of the UK's population. That's quite a lot. That doesn't include interpreters who sign. They would be on top of the statistics. So do you think it's rude to point? I know hearing culture is rather different to deaf people and it can be perceived as rude. It's more acceptable for babies. However, for deaf people, we are visual people. So pointing helps us to identify who, what, where might be talking. There are different types of deafness. And these can vary as a result of history, really. It depends whether the child went to boarding school, whether they went to mainstream school, whether there was a deaf unit, whether they've met deaf people, whether they've gone to a deaf school. For me, I went to a mainstream school in Northampton. However, my deaf friends went to boarding school. So, hard of hearing. There might be some distortions within the ear, so they cannot pick up all the sound, therefore they will wear hearing aids. However, hearing loss will gradually fade over time. You're more likely to have an older person that's hard of hearing due to age. For example, my father, he often shouts, and I said, "Oh, you're going deaf, Dad." He's like, "No, I'm not." And I was like, "I think you need to hear it." "No, I don't." So it's what you'd expect over time. Sometimes where people have lost their hearing dramatically overnight, whereby it might be an illness, therefore like measles or meningitis, whereby a hearing person has suddenly lost their hearing. This is where technology called cochlear implants would be beneficial for those people, on account of they have the hearing, they have the knowledge there. So therefore, when the cochlear implant is placed in, the brain is still able to process that sound, and therefore they are more likely to be able to access words. What is deafness? Deaf sign language users. Deaf people more than likely were born deaf, and they identify as being deaf. They're proud to be deaf. They're involved in the deaf community. So sign language would be their preferred language. However, some people will speak, some people won't. It's entirely a personal preference to that deaf person. There's also deaf blindness. You would identify with a white stick for a blind person. However, if a person was deaf blind, you would have a white stick with a red tape around it. So you will know not only are they blind, but they're deaf as well. There's different degrees of sight and hearing loss, and they will use something called hands-on in order to communicate. So what you would expect to see would be a PA supporting the deaf-blind person, quite likely to be deaf or hearing with sign language, who would be signing, and the deaf-blind person will place their hands upon the person's hands, and the movement will show the deaf-blind person what's being said. Some people use Braille. Gosh, I used Braille. Sorry, it's my experience within a restaurant that I've been given Braille. I said that I'm deaf, and they've come to give me a Braille menu, and I'm like, no, I'm deaf, I'm not blind. So it's quite a common misconception. So deaf people do not read Braille unless deaf blind, and they were taught to do so. So describing deaf people, there's deaf. Historically, there was something known as big D, little d. However, that's changed, and that's linked to politics, really. It's quite complex, so I'll just hold that one for now, but just know that it's changed. So you've got deaf, deafened, hard of hearing, deaf blind. And the categories of deafness are mild, severe, moderate, and profound. You can Google something called a speech bubble. So my deafness is 80 to 100 decibels. So if you Google the speech bubble, then you'll be able to understand what sounds I can or cannot hear, and what other deaf people may be able to experience. So for you guys, listening to a plane going over your head, I imagine would be incredibly loud. However, for me, it's just a soft, gentle noise, and that just it's quite a difference. So I'm not sure if you're able to imagine that. So these terms are quite old. So you've got to be careful how you use language, because you don't want to offend deaf people. So hearing impaired is very much linked to the medical model. An impairment is seen as a negative connotation, and therefore deaf people do not like this. We don't have an impairment, we're deaf, that's it. Oh, apologies, I've just done something to the screen. Press the wrong button. Here we go. Partially deaf, that's okay, that's acceptable within the community. Deaf and dumb, huge no-no. That's linked to the older generation. It's quite a patronising term as well, and it's very old-fashioned. Yeah, so if an old person were to say, oh yes, I'm deaf and dumb, a more young deaf person might go, oh no, we don't use that term anymore. And it's something that the younger generation don't appreciate. Then the final term, deafened. As I said before, big D, little d, this is the history of it. So sign language would be their first language. They identify and share experiences with other deaf people. They're involved in the deaf community and they do not see themselves as disabled. They've got a huge, beautiful, rich culture and that's linked to deaf history, and they're very proud to be deaf and to belong to the deaf community. So deaf with a little d. So you've got deafened, hard of hearing, people do not use sign language. So they might prefer the written language or spoken. So when people ask me, which am I said, I'm either. I don't identify with either. That's just me. Then that's my personal preference. I can write, I can read. I want to be included in everything. I guess that's where the history of this all has come from. It separated people into two categories, which is no longer acceptable. We now use deafness used as a beautiful, rich variety. The deaf people, like hearing people, are not the same. There are many varieties. Some people speak, some people don't. Some people sign, some people don't. Even sign language differs. So we have dialects within sign language. It's no different to a Scottish person and an English person. So here I've just signed 3 different signs. I've signed toilet 3 different ways, and depending where you live within the country, can identify where they're from. So I'll know from the sign language whether they're Scottish, whether they're from Newcastle, or whether they're from London. Same with numbers, there's many differences in the colours, the numbers. So I would sign green like this. However, the North would sign green and it looks a bit like an angel. I'd say it's of paramount importance to respect a deaf person's communication. Ask them what they prefer. I hope so far everything's going well. So covering coping as a deaf person within a hearing world. So it's called dinner table syndrome. It's like Christmas, oh Lord. You imagine the scene, everybody's around, everyone's laughing and joking. However, I'm within an entire family of hearing people and I'm the only deaf sat there. I just concentrate on eating my dinner. Don't get me wrong, deaf people love food and they'd love to go for food. That's also part of deaf people's culture. They do love a buffet. It's quite amusing. But in terms of the scenario itself, it can present its own challenges. Some deaf people can communicate with hearing people well, but depending on whether they have a moustache, whether they've got clearer lip patterns, depends whether the deaf person can communicate well. They might, in the end, use pen and paper to help communication. There's instances where some deaf people don't understand other deaf people. Just because 2 people are deaf doesn't mean they're always going to be able to communicate. There's lip reading, signing, regional signs. There could be complex information being conveyed. There's metaphors. And also figure of speech as well. Things like that, metaphors, all these things, deaf people will have to understand hearing culture because it's just not always clear to a deaf person what a hearing person is saying. British people love metaphors. So in terms of culture, deaf people and hearing people. So hearing people would blow a whistle, deaf person would wave. So for example, if there was a race, the pistol, we would use a torch. So in terms of cheering, hearing people would clap and a deaf person would wave their hands, also known to many people as jazz hands. You'd see that, like Strictly Come Dancing. I don't know if you were able to log into that, I guess. When Rose was dancing and finished, everyone would be waving their hands up. So communication tips. Maybe you want to learn some basic sign language. You want to fingerspell your name and use a few gestures. You could always write in the air, but please be very aware not to use complex language. Jargon is a no-no. For anything that's more complex, it is paramount to use an interpreter so that the information can be conveyed to a deaf person accurately. So what should I do when talking to a deaf person? Make sure you get the deaf person's attention. Speak clearly. Slightly slower what you're saying. Try and change your facial expressions. Be a bit more expressive on what you do, because some people can have such blank faces. Make sure you have light on your face. Don't stand behind a window, because if you're standing behind a window and a deaf person's looking at you, a shadow is created behind you, so your face goes into darkness and the deaf person may not be able to see your face. Make sure you repeat information. Make sure you were clear. You might need to repeat or reframe what you're asking. If you don't understand, be honest. Don't feel bad. Don't be embarrassed. Just say, I'm ever so sorry, I don't understand. Don't pretend to understand. To be honest, as a deaf person who is very visual, we can pick up on those little nuances within your body. So eyes tend to get wider and the slight expressionless blank face comes across you. It's like a rabbit caught in the headlights. So we know when you're just going, yeah. So please be honest. If there's a group of people, whether hearing or deaf, make sure the deaf person is always included. If there's a lecture, please try not to move around too much. It's hard for a deaf person to follow a person when they're walking around or pacing. Don't speak all at once. This couldn't be reinforced anymore. Turn taking is vital. Deaf people will over time get used to your mannerisms, the way that you speak, your particular lip patterns. So over time, together you can make sure communication happens successfully. So booking an interpreter, you can see in the yellow there, to get a fully qualified interpreter, you've got 1 to 275 deaf people. So that's one interpreter to 275 people. So that deaf people. So that is an incredible ratio. So when booking interpreter, I cannot stress enough, it is so important to book an interpreter way in advance for something that you need. People often say 2 weeks. I would often give it a bit more. It's no different to a plumber or an electrician. Trying to get hold of an interpreter is so hard. You need to have plenty of notice. Sometimes, since COVID has struck, you're lucky now having VRS, which is the video relay service. You might be lucky in gaining an online interpreter at last minute. However, if you were to book face to face, you will definitely need notice given. So new technologies, you've got text relay, you've got email, SMS, face-to-face interpreting, video interpreter. So I always use video call for my family and friends, so I can see their faces, and I can try and communicate with my family because I can see them. It's made life so much easier. So this is just repeated what we've said. So deaf person, to get their attention, tap them on the shoulder, switch the light on and off. Sometimes if you hit a table, depending on the surface, the deaf person might pick up the vibrations. Wave, try and get their attention. And make sure you get eye contact. So just over exaggerate your eye contact to try and catch their eye. So the do's. Clear lip patterns, get their attention. I know, I appreciate some people have quite a heavy set beard. I'm not expecting you to go and shave. That's fine. Don't worry, we'll work with you. Use gesture, and most importantly, be patient and use clear language. Don't shout. It doesn't make any difference. In fact, it makes lip reading worse, and I will not be able to understand you. Don't turn away or cover your mouth. Don't speak so slowly. That's a big no-no. So just go home, practice yourself. Use a mirror just to have a look at how you communicate. Look at how you could change your expression, how you could use gesture or point. Just have a practice yourself. And you might realise, having noticed yourself in the mirror practicing, you're like, oh gosh, I maybe don't use lip pattern that well, or maybe I do mumble, or you might be surprised at what you find. Also, when speaking to a deaf person, keep it clear and concise. Do not waffle. It makes communication so much more difficult. So I've got 3 pictures, they'll be coming up. Oh gosh, sorry, I just need to go back. So a photo of the doctors. So what would be the issue here? So I don't know about your doctors, but if you're in the doctor's surgery, quite often the doctor will walk into the reception and call your name. Sometimes they have an intercom. Some new places have a digital screen. So for example, I literally just staring at a screen. You will not see a deaf person looking around because they're just intent on the screen, waiting for their name to pop up. However, because of coronavirus, people have been wearing masks a lot, and therefore trying to lip read within a world that's wearing masks and taking away the majority of our language makes life very difficult for a deaf person. So the second photo that you see, there's many windows behind the board meeting members. So for a deaf person, they would need their back to the window so that the hearing person can look at me, and that would be fine. However, reverse of that, the hearing person behind the window, it would create a shadow and I wouldn't be able to read your face. Therefore, you could have to make adaptations by closing curtains, blinds, or what have you. Also as well, flickering lights. You know, the long tube lights? Maybe some people don't notice. However, as a deaf person, because I use visual language, you can see the flickering, and eyes are a muscle and very, very sensitive and quick to tire. So it's incredible, those lights, how much they wear you out. So not only are you taking in information from an interpreter, but you're having these lights flickering, and it just adds to the pressure that we could do without. I get headaches. It happens to me at home, and I just get so worn out. But you guys, you can shut your eyes and you can look around, because you're auditory, you take in the information. So your ears are a bone, therefore never tire. The eye is a muscle and will tire. So always make sure you give a break to a deaf person. Some buildings, if you're trying to enter them, have an intercom system. To be honest, in my experience, I don't know if somebody's talking or not. So I will just hold the button until somebody comes down to see what on earth's going on. It generally gets the right reaction and I get let into the building. But that's just my way. I know you use a little bit of humour, but it's hearing people don't always understand. So deaf people encounter issues or challenges in their everyday life. And now you have a better understanding of what it means and feels to be like a deaf person. So we're going to cover the BSL alphabet. Please have a look at this at home. Remember, if you've got a left or a right hand, so that you would be writing with, exactly the same as sign language. Think about your more dominant hand being the pen. I'm left-handed, so my vowels would be on my right hand. A being the thumb, E, I, O, and U. And this is for a left-handed person. A right-handed person, the left hand would be placed flat. The index finger of the right hand would point to A and then E, I, O, U. However, over time, you'll get used to it. We don't overly take the time to read sign language on the fingers. You'll learn, you'll get used to it. So you'd have your hand to face you, A, E, I, O, U. We wouldn't place the palm of the hand out towards people. So you could try and practice at home. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, do. I know, I appreciate I'm doing it a little bit too fast here. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L. L is one finger. M, 3. N, 2. O. P, Q, R. Not the other way. It's towards your body. So it's like a little hooked finger towards you. S. So it's on top, the more dominant hand will go over the left hand. S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. And there you have it, the BSL A to Z. Please feel free to watch this video and practice for yourselves at home. Alternatively, you might want to see things online. So as I just explained, right-handed, left-handed differs. So this obviously majority of people are right-handed, so I've just posted that there for you guys. So introducing yourself, you'd say name, me. Hello, are you well? Me, okay, thank you. Name, me, what? And then you'd finger spell your name. So Jessica, Jessica. Name, you, what? You live where? Me, live, and then you'd finger spell where you are. So I'd spell Northampton. So this is the sign for deaf. Hearing. So you have one finger pointed in the air, one index finger points to your ear, and then your mouth. Hearing. Deafened would be a gradual descent in your ears, next to your ears. Hard of hearing is H-O-H, so hard of hearing. Sorry. So don't understand. So it's like you're flicking something off your index finger with your thumb, and then you put it up by your head. Don't understand. If you understand, you repeat the sign. So you would nod your head to signify that you do understand, or use the sign understand and shake your head to signify that you do not understand.
Good morning.
Good morning. So right-handed people would hold your thumb up, and then you would go to a flat hand and say morning across the chest, and that would be from the left to the right. Good morning. Almost done, guys. So really this section is to do with how English differs from British Sign Language grammar. In English, for example, we have subject, verb, object order. I is the subject, made is the verb, some pancakes, pancakes being the object. I made some pancakes, SVO. However, sign language is very different. So you'd say me, pancakes made. Therefore, subject, object, verb. So you have time frame, topic, action, then comment. I, pancakes made. So topic, action. Not I made some pancakes. I appreciate it can be quite complicated. That's why when you're writing words, deaf people may not always understand what you're writing. So keep it so simple. So for example, maybe if you're at the doctor's, say medication, ill, so just try and use those key words without all the in-betweeny bits. Try and keep it simple. So in English, we'd say a black car. So in English, you'd say Mary sat on the chair. The boy climbed up the tree. A man climbed onto the horse and rode very fast. BSL, you'd say car black. Not even an A. A doesn't even exist. Car black. So Mary sat on the chair becomes chair, Mary sat. The boy climbed up the tree. Tree, boy, climb. You've noticed there's no ED. So it's not climbed. So you've got the topic, comment, and action. A man climbed onto the horse and rode very fast becomes horse, man, climb, rode fast. This is so recent and something we're incredibly proud of and been fighting so hard for. So sign language has finally become a recognised language. It's official, finally. Scotland and Wales finished. Northern Ireland are yet to catch up, but finally in England. So the bill was passed by the House of Lords on April the 28th, 2003, just so recently. It was an incredible amount of work put into campaigning and tirelessly fighting within the deaf community and those that support the deaf community. So it means now you have to, by law, provide an interpreter, a qualified registered interpreter. You can't just use Joe Blogs to come and sign for you at the doctor's. That is no longer the case. And about time too as well. Just checking the time there. Numbers. Just very quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But when you use numbers, don't worry. Even if you just hold up your fingers, as long as there's the correct amount of fingers being showed, that's as long as communication is happening, that's all that matters. And then you've got year 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 and 20. So you have a little handshake with the 11s to 20s just to signify it's the teens. So they're double figures, that's why you have the double handshake. It goes on there, so you'll be able to access the PowerPoint and be able to familiarise yourself with the words and the numbers. There's a few family signs as well that you'd be able to practice at home. Just checking time quick. So if you've any questions, or if you want to email me, or you want to book interpreters or anything like this, please feel free to contact me. But I just want to thank you so much for today, for your patience and for watching us, and I really appreciate it. Yeah, if you want to fire your questions, I'd be happy to answer those now. So shall I stop sharing the screen?
Yes, please.
Are there any questions? I'm not sure if I can access the chat box. Would anybody be able to do that for me?
Yeah, there was a question. I mean, firstly, just thank you, Jess, for such an informative session. There's so much there that I learned that I had no idea of. So I'm feeling really quite ignorant, but appreciating the learning. So a question that Owen has put in the chat, with day-to-day technology that we're using now, is there anything that could be improved?
Technology does improve things, very much so. So COVID, when that hit, all of a sudden everybody, we're no different to you, we all of a sudden discovered Zoom and MS Teams. Now, like today wouldn't have happened without the technology. Very recently, I don't know if you're aware, but 999 service, we never had as deaf people ability to access the emergency services. Literally in the last 2 weeks, they have now updated technology so we can catch up and make emergency phone calls. So the phone's usually linked to GPS, so I can do that. The police or fire or ambulance service can find where you are based on your exact location, linked to the GPS on your phone. Also 3 words as well. I don't know if you're aware of that, but that's incredibly useful as well. It's called 3 words. That's a new thing. So that's based on your exact location within the whole world, has been mapped by these 3 words. So you get on your phone, find out where it is, you say the 3 words, and they can come to you immediately. So technology has been very beneficial for deaf people.
Brilliant, thank you, Jess. And a question that I put in the chat was on MS Teams. When I was trying to follow the sign language, I was just conscious that was it reversed on. So if I was learning to sign to a deaf person, is it reversed on Teams?
Ah, of course, I never thought of that. Yeah. Maybe the finger spelling might flip. Yeah, that's a very good question.
Okay.
I might have to have a look later and get back to you on that one, on account of I don't honestly know off the top of my head. Maybe, yeah, we can work it out. So.
Okay, maybe I'll have to learn something, and then I'll practice signing to you, Jess, and you can tell me. So we've got some comments in the chat. We've got lots of comments in the chat. There was a question from Jane saying, why are the courses so expensive? Jane, I'm not sure what courses you've referred to, unless I've missed that.
Yeah,
I understand the courses are incredibly expensive, aren't they? So you've got the award because you've got all 4 modules. I think it's £30 each for that, and it depends whether it's level 1 to level 6. Then you've got the teacher's cost on top, and that's per hour. Then there's the room hire, And then there's the travel cost. There aren't enough deaf teachers, so you'll find that people will travel. So I actually teach level 1. But you're talking hundreds here, and that's not something that you're going to profit on. It's literally the price that you see is the price for the teacher, the travel, the room, and all those additional costs. So I appreciate, Jane, it is incredibly expensive. And also then there's the electric, the printing costs, it all adds up. So there aren't enough grants out there for people to learn and appreciate, but hopefully with the BSL Act, that means we can reduce costs somehow. But to be honest, it could be argued that sign language should be taught in school. So there's not enough teachers out there. So it's incredibly a niche market.
Yeah, because that's the thing I found, because I just finished a 6-week taster course, and I'd got my name down for the BSL level 1, and then found out that there's actually 6 levels. So the thing that I could afford BSL level 1, because I think that totals out £485 for the level 1, and I mean it's very good.
Yeah, so an interpreter level is level 6. So an interpreter would spend easily 12,000 on their education. To be a qualified interpreter takes a long time and a lot of hard work and effort, and it's incredibly expensive. And that's why I guess there aren't that many interpreters. So so part 1 for my deaf relay interpreter was £4,000 alone. I've got to pay part 2 yet, and that's on hold yet because I need to earn my money. So prices are crazy, and I completely feel you there, Jane.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Jane. I've just picked myself up off the floor in terms of the cost there, the £12,000. Gosh, that's shocking. So lots of colleagues have said they found it so interesting. They're inspired to go and look for a BSL introduction course. Jennifer has asked, she's a school nurse, and are there any website support groups children and families can be signposted to?
For deaf children, you mean?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, I can send any information. There's 2 or 3 places that I'm thinking of. So there's charities out there, so I can send those over to you, Anne, and if you wouldn't mind disseminating that information, I'm happy to share that with you guys.
Absolutely, yeah, we'll share those, and if we can as well, Jess, we'll share your slides too.
So the NDCS has certain courses for family members. They have activity camps for deaf children. So is this kind of the flavour of what you were asking for? I just want to make sure I've answered the question correctly.
Was Jennifer asking that question? Yes, she says yes. Yeah, it's in the chat. Okay.
Lovely.
Brilliant. And a comment from Lisa. She says, as a deafened person in the trust, I found access to work amazing, finding technology to keep me in the workplace.
Yes, incredibly
Waiting
so.
my
Yes,
Google phone,
I have access to work too.
Yeah, I didn't know things could do this. I'm awaiting my Google phone, which instantly transcribes the voice of the person calling me. Okay.
Wow,
so
that's great.
I think that's everything in the chat. So I will hand back to Dave.
Oh, just quickly, whilst talking about access to work. So access to work is a government funded scheme and it's great, but there's not enough deaf people using it. I think it's 1% of deaf people use access to work. So it means they've reduced the amount given for supporting deaf people. I think the maximum this year is £63,000 award. And you think, oh yeah, that's great. That's a wonderful amount of money. But if you think about the communication needs, technology, if you need interpreters time for 20 hours a week, that's an incredible amount that is already taken out of that budget. So before there was no limit, however, they've put a limit on it. I think they try to work out for every pound you spend, I think they claim through to, I don't yeah, I haven't quite worked it out, but yeah. So basically, if you're deaf, please claim access to work.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Jess. And yeah, what
No
a
problem.
school day. What a school day this has been. It's awesome. And it's made me think, in my role as learning development facilitator, how are we going to make our courses accessible more to people who are deaf or have impaired hearing or whatever. So it's definitely made me think. So thank you very much for a great presentation. I'm just going to share my screen, ladies and gents, just to sort of bring the sort of session to an end. So once again, it is okay not to be okay, and sometimes things can trigger or make us reflect or think about whatever. So please reach out. The information is on the screen there, and once again, someone will be there to help with, give you that helping hand, or to listen, or to support. Feedback is a gift. There is no such thing as failure. There's only feedback. I know my colleague is putting the links in, so please use them. But also you can use the QR codes on there with your smart technology. We've heard lots about technology, so please give us feedback. And also you can use the other QR code to find out what is going on in the festival. You can see we have so much on offer, and we are at day two. So there is so much to go. So please take a copy of that if you've got a smartphone. If not, QR code for those with the technology. And once again, join in, but everything is being recorded, so it will be accessible in the future. If you are doing those things and down with the kids on the social media world, then please, if you've enjoyed like Jess's session today, I'm sure we'll all be tweeting it out later on, etc., and use that hashtag VW. If I'd have kept that information, what Jess had put up, I can't remember what that was. VW, can't remember what B was. VWBF22. I've tried, I've given it a go. Please put those hashtags to the socials and help us to help everyone out there to see it. Oh, there we go. It's being done by Jess. Oh, that was the B. Yeah. Oh, damn it. That was the B. Then 2. Oh, we're getting there. We're getting there. Every day is a school day. So I'm going to stop sharing now. But thank you all for joining in. Have a great evening and enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
Cheers, Jess.